so important on this April 4th to remember Senator Robert Kennedy and to remember the Dr. Martin Luther King, what they said at the edge of the hour of their deaths. They died within a season of each other, fighting for freedom, fighting for the cause of justice, which is what makes them great Americans. American people have a choice. There are two political parties in America, and one has become a menace towards our freedoms, towards our democracy, towards our liberty. There is time for enthusiasm to increase in the opposition to Donald Trump, but it's not necessary. What's necessary is an action, and the action is a vote. It's April 4th, 2024. There are 214 days remaining until the presidential election, which will decide America's destiny. This is the warning. April 4th is a significant anniversary in the history of the United States. It is the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, one day after delivering one of the most important, optimistic, and prophetic speeches in American history. Looking back at the plain text of the words, it's clear that Martin Luther King understood that death was at hand. He saw it coming. It was a remarkable address from a 39-year-old man, thrust into national prominence as the leader of an urgent and great moral cause. When the Civil War ended in 1865, Abraham Lincoln was killed. James Garfield, who famously talked about the fact that the Republican Party and the cause would never betray Black Americans, was assassinated. Every time there was progress, there were setbacks. But because in part of the valor of the Tuskegee Airmen in the Second World War, men like Benjamin O. Davis, men like Daniel Inouye, Harry Truman desegregated the armed forces in 1947. Baseball was desegregated, and a woman named Rosa Parks, who was an activist, enraged and tired over the murder of Emmett Till, refused to give up her seat on a bus. She had had enough. She said no. It was an act of defiance to change the world and introduce the American people to a young minister, a brilliant man from Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Martin Luther King, by 1968, was world famous. He was a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, a moral giant of unequal standing, somebody who the American people understood was a man of conviction. And by 1968, this moral giant, this controversial man, had come to support a strike of sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, when he took to the stage and delivered one of the greatest addresses in all of American history, where within it, he lays out the promise that lies ahead. The speech is built and constructed on a series of journeys that connect together. Martin Luther King, when he takes to the stage, imagines the Lord coming to him and saying, "Martin, let me take you on a journey to anywhere you wish to go." And Martin Luther King says to the Lord, takes him up on his offer, and they go to ancient Egypt. They go to the places where, as King says, he could see God's people liberated from their oppression at Pharaoh's hand. And Martin Luther King talks about the journey that continues. He goes to Rome and to ancient Greece, but he continues forward, always onward. He explained that though he wanted to see those things, if he were to be born in any other period, to stay there, to live there, that he would not be part of the great events of his time. He said he wouldn't be there in Selma. He wouldn't be there in Montgomery. He wouldn't be there in Birmingham. What Martin Luther King is saying is that it was a privilege to be in the fight, to be in the center of the action in a great cause. And that cause, of course, was human freedom. Dr. King looks out on the crowd and he says that longevity has its purpose. He wants to live a long life like everyone else. He's a young man with a family. He talks about it. He says he wants to see his kids grow old. He wants to grow old. Longevity has its purpose, but he says none of that matters now because he has been to the mountaintop. And he tells us what he sees from that mountaintop. What he sees over it is the just society, a place where the founder's vision, our ideals and ideas have been fulfilled, where we truly are the city upon a hill. Martin Luther King's vision tells us we will reach that destination. In fact, that he knows it because he has seen it. And it's with calm and determination he describes it on the edge of his assassination. Later, Senator Robert Kennedy will be in Indianapolis, about to speak to a crowd made up of mostly Black people, mostly poor Black people. He'll be standing in the back of a pickup truck. And immediately before he goes on, you can hear him being told of the news on a hot mic. The Reverend Martin Luther King is dead. Now, all across America's cities, there will be riots and violence. The cities will burn, all except for one, Indianapolis, where Robert Kennedy speaks. It's funny, we talk about the polls. There's new ones out today, polls that suggest that there's a lot more enthusiasm among MAGA voters than there is amongst Democratic voters, that the Republicans, the MAGA forces, have the enthusiasm edge. The polls say a lot of things. We live in a time where there are thousands of points of data on each American voter. Nobody ever says anything without testing it and retesting it, focus group after focus group, poll after poll, stripping everything of meaning and conviction. Senator Robert Kennedy didn't have that opportunity on April 4th, 1968. He had to speak to a crowd, and he did so spontaneously. He didn't do it with the helping hand of the pollster, the guiding hand of the message guru. He spoke from the heart as a political leader. And what did he talk about? Talked about universal truths, talked about love. To this poor Black crowd in Indianapolis, he talked intimately about the loss of his brother, also to violence, also at the hand of a white man. He quoted the Greek poet Aeschylus. What Robert Kennedy talked about that night is eternally important in the United States. These two speeches, one by a Black American giant, another by a white man, both American martyrs in the same year of 1968, are forever connected together. It's important to remember them, to watch them, not just their clips, but the entire speeches in their entirety, to hear the words of wisdom, of restraint, of forgiveness. Forgiveness. What Donald Trump is calling for, the politics of revenge, the politics of retribution, the politics where there will be vast prison camps for deportations of migrants who will be herded into them like animals, The politics that says if you disagree with me, then you'll be punished by the use of the IRS or maybe even a prison sentence. The American people may not feel enthusiasm in this moment to reject this promise of vengeance and retribution, these intimations for political violence, which are everywhere and growing more menacing. The American people have a choice, and they don't have to be enthusiastic to make it. They just have to make it. And the choice is clear. There are two political parties in America, and one has become a menace towards our freedoms, towards our democracy, towards our liberty. That party has been taken over by Donald Trump, by his horde of MAGA fanatics that are but a fraction of the whole of our country, yet are large enough in form and function to control one of the two political parties, and thus the highway by which you take political power. They stand at the edge of doing it. In the third decade of the 21st century. And it's time for young people and old people, all people who care about the future, about the dignity of people, to stand together in a common cause against this threat to all of us before it is too late. There is time for enthusiasm to increase in the opposition to Donald Trump, but it's not necessary. What's necessary is an action, and the action is a vote. It's one action that's taken on one day, where all you have to do is say no, enough, stop it. Because after that, we can start talking about all of the things that can be done to start walking together into a better future as a nation towards that valley of justice that Dr. King saw from the mountaintop. But until then, we must join together so we don't go into the abyss together. There are stars that hang in the sky that are like guides. The speeches, the great words from our greatest figures are like those guides, those North Stars, Polarises on a dark night. That's why it's so important on this April 4th to remember Senator Robert Kennedy and to remember the Dr. Martin Luther King, what they said at the edge of the hour of their deaths, what made them great, what made them the finest of patriots, why they were mourned, why they were remembered, and why we honor their legacies. Because they were legacies of strength, carved from the granite of love, that rejected hate and nationalism and a triumphalism that placed one human being on top of another, that subjugated one person under the claims that another was superior somehow. These two great men made history together, and they died within a season of each other, fighting for freedom, fighting for the cause of justice, which is what makes them great Americans. And that legacy should never be repudiated, and must not be, and cannot be. The choice is President Biden versus this man, the fascist, Donald Trump. That's the choice. It is an easy one because only one of these men supports the American way of life. The other will wreck it, and he has already desecrated it. For president, the choice is clear. Joe Biden, what will you do to get involved? There are 214 days left. Thank you for listening to my political commentary. If you like what you heard today, please also consider subscribing to the Warning daily newsletter on Substack.